All right, thank you, Brian. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this last presentation. Hopefully, we'll be able to make it a good closing to the summit. Has everybody enjoyed the summit so far this year? Yeah, good. How many people are new, first-timers? Awesome, nice. A few people. All right, so our agenda here, pretty quickly kind of go over a few things here. What is security architecture, business acumen, systems architecture, and then we'll talk about a little bit of a conundrum. I don't think that we're going to get into the case study because I've got a lot of slides here, but it'll be available in the slide deck for anybody who wants to take a look at it afterwards. It's going to be made available. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So first thing I'm going to tell you is that I by no means would consider myself an expert in enterprise security architecture, right? So that's not really my thing. So that I kind of interested in this for more of a student, I guess, of this. That might make you ask, why is this guy here? Who is he, and why would he want to do this talk? So. The reason is pretty simple. I sometimes have felt like the guy there, kind of flying by the seat of your pants, kind of thing. And I've noticed a few things over the years here that become kind of recurring issues or concepts that I struggle with. And part of it is I don't know when I'm talking to leadership or a board if I'm hitting the mark with them, right? If they're understanding what I'm saying, if it's resonating with them, and if I'm communicating enough. So it's made me kind of want to dig into this a little bit and figure out what's the solution, right? I need a better solution. And so the journey kind of begins there. And so before we get into it though, I was going to ask, how many people, how would you define, or anybody in the audience, how would you define security architecture? What would you say it is? Anybody? Maybe a better question is, how many people think that everybody would have the same definition of that in this room? Right, probably not too many. So, some people would think of it as just a collection of our security tools or the controls that we put in place, the strength of those controls, that kind of thing. Palo Alto, on their website, you can go look at that. They say it's a blueprint for our security posture as an organization. Some of us would think of concepts like zero trust, right? That's a big thing that's out there now. Everybody said zero trust the way to go. Others think of, the secure access, service edge, right? So if you're a cloud environment, maybe that's where you're going, right? You got to control all of those integrations and things like that. Or you're maybe looking at a more traditional model where we have the layers, right? The security kind of, we saw at the Target kind of today at the keynote. But no matter what that is, right, all of those are probably correct. You could do probably any of those, right, to solve your problems. And I think that in the end, we're probably going to end up with one of those anyway, right? No matter what we do, we're probably going to end up with a pretty technical definition of security architecture. But it's important to realize that's very tactical, and it's very focused, and it's very technical, and that's our view of that as security professionals. And, implementing firewalls and other controls and, different protocols, it could be a lot of fun. It's a boatload of fun for technical people, but it doesn't help a business understand why it's important, right? It doesn't allow them to see the value. So there's challenges from a business perspective that we need to overcome. And I think it boils down to a lack of understanding among leadership and the different stakeholders, right, of what it is that we actually do. And, we're focused on that technical view of security. So pivoting a little bit and just kind of stepping back from that, for years, and I've been around for a while, but for years we've been hearing about business acumen. Technology people need more business acumen. They need a better understanding of, what's important to the business. Does that sound familiar? Have people heard that? Like for 25 years now, right? We've heard that. Has anybody actually told anybody exactly what that means and exactly what they're looking for? I've never heard exactly what that means either. So I kind of started thinking about that and what is it they're really looking for? So for me, it's like, okay, read management books, right? Start thinking about things like metrics and reporting and things that managers do. And I still go into these meetings, or maybe go into a board meeting, and you lose them. Their eyes glass over, they start picking up their phones, they're not paying attention. So I've tried a few things to, shake that up a little bit, thinking about when they tell us, know your audience, right? What's important to them? And so I started thinking about that. It's like, okay, I'm talking to them about, threats and vulnerabilities, not catching their attention. But the minute that I hit on growth itself is a risk, and this is why the security findings in our risk assessment are important, because we can't achieve the growth that the business is looking for if we don't prepare for that now. That gets their attention. Their eyes will, oh, I need to know about that, because I might not be able to do what I want to do. So that's important to think about that. So tailor your message to the audience. But I'm still struggling, right, when we do some of this, because I still lose them somewhere along the line. Making sure that, because we're talking about, right, KPIs for, vulnerability management, for other things, that were threats. We're talking about threats. But if you really want to lose them, start talking to them something about like mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to recover. They want to know about recover, not so interested in those other things. So what do we do about that? All right. Well, share a little story with you. So for you, those of you who don't know me, and there's probably quite a few, I've been in InfoSec for about 20 years now, a little over 20 years. And 7 years ago, I joined Gray Castle Security. It's a small consulting company. We were purchased last year by a company called Deep Seas. So when I started there, I was delivering all kinds of services, right? So risk assessments, data classification, system security plans, incident response, tabletop exercises, whatever we needed to do. So I'm sitting at a risk assessment with the man who introduced me, Brian Murphy. And we're sitting there and I'm telling them about the process of the risk workshop. And the CEO pointedly, and actually a little aggressively, asks us, how many of these have you done actually performed? And I thought Brian was going to come out of his chair. I mean, I could feel the steam, out of his ears hitting me in the side of the head. And so I just simply told him, this year I've done about 30, right? I've done about 30 risk assessments, which was true. And he just said, okay, then we moved on, right? So Alyssa said something yesterday that I felt was pretty important. A lot of times somebody will ask you a question, but that's not the question they're asking. And we need to be able to understand when that happens. I think the question that the CEO was asking was, are you going to understand what's important to me? Are you going to understand my position when we're talking about these risks that I have no idea about? And are you going to listen to me? So a little posturing probably, a little, saying, hey, I'm in charge here. And, we were able to move on. But I think that's important because from a security perspective, we need to understand the goals of the organization. I think that we've heard that through the keynotes over the last couple of days here, and that's very important. And it's also the part I find most difficult. And I don't know how many of you find that difficult. I know there's some architects in the room here. I see them and that. But making that connection, for me, is probably the most difficult. Because, for instance, if a company's goal, right, first of all, how many people understand the company's goals they work for? Your company that you work for, what are the corporate goals in that company? Do you know what they are? Everybody know them? Just Lynn knows them. How many people, if we ask again, further down, digging down, how many people understand each department's individual goals that support that company goal? Lynn again, she knows, right? Because she does this. That's what she does. And by the way, any of the hard questions, we're going to defer to Lynn. Okay, so because I don't know them. I'm not an expert here. But I know there's a problem. And so I'm searching for a solution. So what if your company's goal is to increase sales? And this is hypothetical. Again, I'm not a corporate goal person, but who sets those. But say their goal is to increase sales. That's a corporate goal. And if you don't know that the sales teams put together a plan to reach that by pivoting and saying, okay, we understand that 70% of the time, if we're at a client and we're presenting a contract and there's an issue with that, and we go back to change that, 70% of the time they never sign. So I want to change that while I'm at the client. But we've seen that we're getting attacked a lot. So over here I'm putting in a geo-blocking VPN, and they can't get back in, and they lose that sale. And that causes them not to meet their sales target, and that causes the company not to meet their revenue target. What do we look like when that happens? Right? We kind of look bad. That's why they're going, yeah, it's those IT guys again, right? Or those security guys. So that's not cool. We don't want to do that. So if we dig a little bit deeper and we take a step back and we look at a business system and we think of it in terms of a complete system, we'll see we have different layers of architecture. We have infrastructure architecture, application architecture, and that's where I think we collectively like to live, right? We understand that. It makes sense to us. And because of that, I think we pivot almost immediately to that tactical view. And when we do that, we lose people. They're not going to understand what we're talking about. So we probably have some work to do in understanding and become more familiar with some of these other layers here. So business architecture layer, think about that. We think about that as probably all of the operations and the things that the business does, different departments, different procedures, different compliance requirements. The larger the organization, the more complex it becomes. But that's like how the business works. And under that, you're going to have like a layer of information architecture. How do we store our data? Are we using databases? Are they distributed? Are they not? Even sharing the rules about sharing data, and how we integrate different systems. And then under there is our applications architecture, which we're pretty familiar with, I think, middleware and I think of different things like that make it all work. allow the business to get its job done, right? These are the tools that the business uses to achieve the goals. And under that is that infrastructure layer where we're probably most comfortable. So across all of that, if you lay this risk management architecture, this is where the business starts to define the risk objectives for the business. They set that risk tolerance. And when we think about risk, I know from my perspective, it's always been as a control to stop something bad from happening, or, we've got this issue. Sometimes we assess gaps, right? And we say this could create this risk. We're poor at putting that into a business context, what that risk means from an IT position. A lot of us, myself included. I've tried over the years to be better at that, right? Try to say, we can't achieve this because of this, or this is a specific risk. But without having that view of the corporate's idea of risk and having them set that risk tolerance, we're not able to communicate that very well. So another question for you is, how many people have an InfoSec risk register? Maybe have, here's my InfoSec risks. You've probably heard like a vulnerability probably isn't really, you shouldn't be on your risk register. Heard that the other day. How many people in their company has a corporate risk register? Okay, a lot of hands didn't go up, right? So, how many of your IT risks, right, your information security risks roll up to that risk register, the corporate risk register? And maybe a better question is, how aware are you of the non-IT related corporate risk register risks? Would that be valuable in trying to determine what Alyssa was talking about how we can add value? If we knew what those were, maybe we can make a better decision, right? So just the fact that most companies don't have a corporate risk register is probably a problem. So we're only left with that, the InfoSec risk register. But we think about risk and managing risk. We think about reducing the probability and the impact that something bad is going to happen. But the reverse side of that is an opportunity cost, or potentially an opportunity cost for the organization. And I rarely hear anybody in IT talking about an opportunity cost, right? What are they not going to be able to do? And going back to understanding, even at that department level, what their goal is, we might not understand what they can't do. So we need that communication, I think, both ways, right? And then around all of this is our management and governance architecture, which is just the structure of the organization and leadership and who's doing what. And, it might be a Six Sigma model they follow. It might be, a traditional board model that they follow. But it's the policies, procedures, the way, the business is going to manage all of this. And sometimes that might be important for us to understand as well. All right. So when we move on from this, I think about requirements, right? So requirements are probably a really important thing to have for your security architecture. A couple of years ago, I started working with an organization that had just been through a ransomware attack. And they're 6 weeks in and their network is still down. So they hire a management consultant and they hire a networking consulting company, and they hire a company for application consulting, and they hire Greg Hassel Security to help them. So we get together and they say, well, we need to rebuild this network. We need a new network. The network was very flat. They didn't have a lot of controls in place. People could, come in and pivot around the network pretty easily. So they said, we need a new network. Okay, great. out of the incident response said you should segment your network. You should have network segmentation, some things in place to prevent people from moving around the network. So we're sitting there, great. We're sitting at a meeting and they say, so, what security controls do we have to put in place? It's like, well, what do you need? What is your goals? What are your requirements? And the management company said, we got that out on the share. Just go take a look at that. And I literally opened up the document and it basically says we need a new network. That's it, right? There's really nothing else. And they want to know what security standards we put in place, right? Tell us what it is, what the best practices are. I can't tell you what you need unless we know what you need to do, right? Why do you have a network? What does it need to do? Without knowing that, it's kind of silly, right? But that happens. That happens out there. So how do we deal with that? So I really think that the journey begins right up at that business architecture layer, right? And I think it's important that we have that top-down view. So, thinking about, kind of stepping back, another thing that happened to me in the past, and I've kind of thought about this after I was looking at this model and with a couple of conversations that happened there. So information data architecture, right? We heard yesterday about identity and how important that is to manage identities. And so the systems become really complex. But this was probably 15, 17 years ago. I got a call from an Oracle rep. At the time I was working for Kodak. And the Oracle rep wanted to know if I knew anything about Oracle, right? And I was in a hurry and I thought that was really weird because we were a pretty big Oracle customer at the time. So I told him to send me some information and I started thinking, this guy's probably trying to scam me. He probably wants to know something, right? And so I reached out to our Oracle rep and I said, is this guy legit? Who is this guy, right? Why does Oracle have another sales rep trying to contact a customer of theirs and has no clue that he's a customer, And I thought that was kind of funny, but then I kind of thought about this and it's like, okay, maybe they're not sharing information. It was right after Oracle purchased Sun Microsystems, which we were a big Sun shop too. And I thought maybe he didn't know, right? Maybe it was something like that. But maybe it's, the way that the different business units were sharing data. He just didn't know. But in any way, it was inefficient. It caused me to think, what are you doing? And, wasted his time. So maybe it was a data architecture thing. Maybe it was security control that went bad. He didn't have access to what he needed when he needed it. And that's an important piece of this as well, right? If we think about that system, we want it to be efficient and secure the environment. So, and then back to that risk management architecture, how many people have an information security steering committee? Yep, so it's a few hands, not a lot. And that is a tool that I've been trying to get my clients to adopt and get leadership in the different areas on that, because that is another avenue that you can have to set up these conversations, understand what the business needs are and that kind of thing. So another important, I think, element that is probably missing from most of the things here. But at the end of the day, senior leaders are concerned about all of these things, but they're concerned about it in the context of we're going to succeed as a business, not anything else, right? And that's the whole purpose of the business, is to be able to succeed. And they want us to be their partner in making sure that that happens. We can't talk them technically, right? We need to associate it with those larger goals, and we need to be strategic about it. If you think about something as complex as a county, right, we can see how problematic that can be. I've worked with a couple of counties. You have an information security, kind of a base layer there. And then you're going to need to also consider court systems, libraries, hospitals, school systems, all these different areas that have very conflicting requirements. And you need to be able to provide some security of that. So, how do we do that? Maybe we have a base layer of things, we have overlays for different areas, right? That we may have increased controls and things like that. But it's very complex, and it is a difficult task to do all this and do it well. So this next thing that I'm sharing here is, I think, what I really think of as the architect's conundrum, and it's a major concern, I think. Lynn, tell me if I'm wrong, but usability, cost savings, security, all of those things, we want to balance all that and make sure that it happens, right? We're able to. But I think maybe a bigger question is, when should we skew in one direction or another? How do we answer that question? When is it better to lean more toward usability, or more toward security, or more toward cost control? And maybe the answer to that is in those goals that the organization has, right? So when business leaders say we need more business acumen, I think this is what they mean. And that's just my opinion, right, of thinking about it. I think that's what they're looking for. And I don't know, people can feel free to disagree, but
it's all true. But I mean, what are the goals? Like, which of those things gets short shrift? If you look at the goals of the organization, it's usually going to be a little bit more of a challenge to get the organization to agree that security is an essential goal.
maybe. That's the Information Security Steering Committee, the risk management piece of it, the risk tolerance that they're going to take on.
There's a good reason why regulators don't write regulations to tell development teams that they need to satisfy business requirements. There's not regulations that say that.
Right.
That's the inherent motivation in the organization. So
yeah.
Regulations tell you have to care about security. So that I think is part of it. I mean, that feeds into the conundrum. It's a lot easier to get buy-in when they have cost control and
sure.
usability and satisfy the business users.
Yep. But it does happen, right? It does happen. And I worked for Excelis for a few years, and through the vendor management process, we were evaluating some vendors for telemedicine was pretty early on. And in looking at that, right, when you present the risk in the right context to the right people, they make the decision, right? Even though this one's more money, we're going to go with that because we're not comfortable with that, assuming that level of risk. You have to have those conversations, or it isn't going to, we present information. And we have to present it in the way that makes sense and the business understands and communicate those risks. And it's, it's hard for us because we don't understand necessarily that opportunity cost, right? And that's where we need that conversation. So if we don't have that conversation, we're never going to know it. We're probably going to make a bad choice or potentially make a bad choice. So, but I agree with you. This is why it's hard, right? I mean, it's not, there's no cut and dried answer to this. But, in the research I've done in that, there's some tools that can help us with some of this. So, how much time do we have left, Brian? 15 minutes, okay. So what is enterprise security architecture? And that's different than that technical view. And so what I've been learning about, right? Enterprise security architecture is a framework for bringing in those business goals, understanding what the business wants. It integrates all kinds of different things together, policies and procedures and controls across the organization. And you can then kind of look at this security from a whole organization or enterprise view, and hopefully we reduce risk. We reduce data breaches, or at least contain them to a particular area if we have an understanding of how those controls work. In that example, that I gave about the VPN, that doesn't mean we're not going to implement a geo-blocking VPN, right? Maybe the answer is geo-blocking VPN, but we need an easy way for them to say, I'm going to be out of this area. I need to have access. Maybe it's conditional access control, right? If it's this user with this device that is authenticated because we know its identity, that's okay then, right? So there's other things that we're seeing that are give us some capability, but it's making the right decisions, right, that we're going to implement, from a security perspective. So the business case, again, this is more of the same, right? It's business driven. It's taking the requirements of the business and saying, this is going to be our security model. This is the problem we're trying to solve. Understanding it. And I relate it back to those requirements, right? We got to collect our requirements. Just, stopping there for a second. Years ago, like when I was at Kodak, I was a mid-range systems enterprise architect and not enterprise architect, sorry, mid-range systems architect and did the system administration, things like that, and so dealing with a lot of Unix and, there's a lot of, big systems and that kind of thing. And it was, requirements were so important, right? We had things mapped down to the switch port that they were connected to, and we understood. We took the rigor of drawing it out. And that's how I learned so much over the years from that perspective. We put the rigor and the effort into defining it, designing it, and really understanding what our systems were doing, right down to the component level. And I don't see people do that anymore, right? That's kind of fallen by the wayside. We don't see many people who do that. But the rigor of this process is what's important. Understanding the business at the level that we're not comfortable with and we haven't done before. I don't know, what else is the solution other than taking that step. And again, at the end of the day, we may end up back where we thought we were going to be, but that's okay. We're still better because we've validated it, right? We've validated our opinions and the things that we think we need to do when we do that. So that's the business-driven security model. Risk management and resilience, obviously that's going to be critically important. And again, I'm challenging us to expand beyond the typical risk assessment that we do. Here's a gap, here's a reason why it's bad, we need to fix it, to saying, okay, how am I going to adversely affect the business if I implement this control versus that control? I think that becomes an important conversation. I think it's something that's been lacking. And of course, the compliance and regulatory requirements, that's going to be always changing and something that we need to keep track of. And so maybe these are good reasons, to do a more of an enterprise security architecture model. So, common challenges for companies without kind of that enterprise level security architecture model, siloed security practices, going back to the example with a county government, I've seen that a lot. I've dealt with a few counties. Court systems have, these security practices, the, healthcare hospital has this, schools have this, it's all over the map. Nobody's doing the same thing. A lot of duplication of effort, a lot of wasted resources. Business alignment, they don't usually have security controls aligned with the business needs, and they're really reactive. We play whack-a-mole a lot as security people, right? You have a problem, let's get a tool, right? A lot of times these tools aren't implemented, taking the best advantage of what they do, and, it just continues on and until we have an issue and we, are re-architecting everything, right? Because the solution wasn't good to begin with. So what are the key benefits of enterprise security architecture? It's holistic, right? It has that full view. It can be proactive, right? So thinking about that, every year your company does goals and objectives, and they set new goals, right? And they may be the same or they may be adjusted a little bit, but people are going to make up new other goals to support those. And we've got regulatory requirements changing. So it has to be the continual improvement cycle that we would normally be advocating for anyway, right? You know, continuous improvement. So that's the proactive side. And then the scalability and flexibility, right? Maybe we're able to scale better because we have a better understanding of where they need to go in the future, and we're planning for that. The roadmap. The roadmap to security needs to include the goals and objectives of the business. Decision making as well. The more data we have, the better decisions we make. And the efficiency that we've already talked about. So key components, so these frameworks have a couple things in common, and we'll hit on a couple of those in a minute here. Policies and standards, governance model, right, wrapped around everything. We need those policies and standards in place to guide us. What are we trying to do? The security frameworks and models. So there's two of them here. We'll talk about SABSA, which is the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture model. And then the Open Group has one called the Open Enterprise Security Architecture model. So those, you know, if we apply those, a lesser extent maybe, ISO 27001 is, you know, a management framework for information security. Maybe that guides us in the implementation of that architecture, as well as NIST CSF. Some tools to help us with that implementation. Back to risk management, that risk appetite. Do we understand what that is in our organization? How adverse to risk are we? How much risk do we want to take on? That helps us make those decisions about, you know, implementing those controls and what we should prioritize as a control as well. Governance and compliance, we know we've got to deal with that in most industries these days. And then the technologies and tools is at the bottom of this list, because until we understand, we shouldn't probably be selecting those tools and technologies. So again, there's two popular models, I guess, out there that I've been able to find anyway. There might be some other ones that are a little more obscure, but that is that Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture and that Open Enterprise Architecture models. I would encourage you to, if you're not familiar with those, to maybe take a look. I don't know that they're the end-all be-all for this, but it's kind of helped me align a little bit in my thought and my thinking about you know, what would be important to help solve this problem. Here's, you know, some other things I just grabbed, you know, out of the book here. So implementation phases for the security architecture, you know, and it makes sense. We've already talked about all this. Define the business and security objectives. Conduct a risk assessment. Develop the policies and controls. Implement the technologies, and then we monitor and we improve. So we do that plan, do, check, act kind of continual improvement cycle. They also have best practices here, right? So it's just more of the same with that, and then it gets into a case study that's included at the end here. I just pulled the case study out of the book, but so I don't know if we're going to have time to run through that. We're at 3:40. At this point, I guess I'll probably just open it up for questions, unless somebody wants to step through this and look at the case study. Anybody have questions, comments? Do you think I'm all wet? Does it make a case to do something differently than we've done? Is that effective? Does it make sense? Do we think we have a problem we need to solve, or? Sure.
Do you actually use the
No, I don't. And it's been something that, you know, like I said, I'm kind of a student of this, right, trying to figure it out and how it really applies. And I see it as a more of a business problem. And this is what we're telling everybody, right? Security is a business problem. To be honest, you you know, it's hard to get senior leadership into a risk assessment, right, when you're talking about a security risk assessment. And if you do get them there, it's even harder to get them to tell you or to communicate that risk in a business context, especially when you don't know what those goals and objectives are.
So I had the book. I had the book and I thought it probably.
Yeah. It's been around a long time.
Yeah, I met the author at Harvard in Las Vegas, and so when I tried to use it to actually identify areas in places I've worked, to identify areas that we should focus on, it's a very daunting thing.
Yeah, I would agree. Just going through it, it's been really daunting.
It is so, like, I think for me personally, I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, to actually just understand what the business objectives are at the enterprise level, and then just waterfall down, right, from there, and then just start to identify all the systems and that, you know, all the infrastructure that actually supports those efforts. Because I tried that a long time ago, and it was way over the top. It does give you good ideas to think about, but
Yeah, yeah. So it is, and I would agree with that. Lynn, yeah?
So, where I work, I think we're kind of forced into this. We are trying pieces of it by nature of the organization structure. So I'm the chief security architect at the company. I used to report to the CISO. I now report to the chief technology officer. So it's more of an enterprise strategy, not specific to security. We have security architects who are here that report to, as security architects, they're part of the enterprise architecture team. So, and not, I mean, obviously, lines of security, but it brings us in far earlier with the business strategy, the business requirements. They understand what the business is really trying to do. It's got its challenges, but it really is caused us to think differently, and not just focus on security technology, and more of the business requirements just by nature of the organization.
Awesome. Well, that's good, right? I think, you know, like you said, it's daunting. It's really hard, right? And from a technologist perspective, it isn't easy to do that, to pivot like that. And there's just so much that's not known. But I think the exercise, you know, and I don't know how many people have thought about, you know, any of this, you know, or even knew that this was a concept. But the exercise to me is the important part, I think, you know, because I'm going to be better, you know, in my position, right? I do security strategy and vCISO work for a lot of clients. But so my struggle is that communication piece, right? And the more I can connect with them on that business side of things, the more about the goals and objectives, I need to figure out how to communicate the security risks in that context. And I think that if we think about that earlier, like if you're just kind of, you know, thinking about moving up through management or something like that, getting your head around this early is probably a good thing, right? You're going to be able to maybe progress a little further, but it can be a real struggle. So, yeah.
So I've been in a few different industries in my career in IT security, from traditional corporate environments to K-12 to higher ed now. And, you know, I guess to kind of touch on everything that just has been said, you know, I find it really needs to be a two-way street, right? You know, we need to understand what the business has its goals, and I've been fortunate, especially in my current position, that is a very transparent thing. You know,
Right, right. And you know, our responsibility there is to also, you know, show that complexity and what that adds, right? And you know, most organizations are resource constrained, very thin, not just tech money-wise, but people-wise, right? How, you know, and that's part of the problem of adding the tools, just layering the tools on. I've got 80 tools now that 3 people manage. How do you do that, right? Is it really practical? Maybe we should, you know, take this more of a, you know, top-down look and figure out what does our security team need to look like, and, you know, what are those tools that make sense? What are we capable of doing, you know? Yeah, yeah. There's challenges there as well. You know, so there again, it's a risk conversation. It's a, you know, is that the right solution provider for us? They can't meet these goals and objectives that we've agreed to as a corporate entity that are important. You know, maybe you need a different vendor, right? But nobody may know about that.
Have you in your work gone in and architected security for an enterprise?
So I don't really get down in doing that piece anymore, you know. So where you're like getting the tools, so we'll evaluate vendors and tools and different things like that, and kind of the overall model. But I'm not like implementing firewalls, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'm asking if you've gone in and architected security based on the business model for any enterprise that you look at.
So yeah, no, not at this level here, right? Taking and starting this, but it is a conversation we have. What are, you know, when you're setting up a program, what are your goals? What are the goals and objectives, right? We ask for a corporate risk register if they have one, right? We want to see that and understand, but it's not a formalized process like this is, where, you know, if you're familiar with this, there's tables that you would do for, like, here's my, you know, conceptual level, here's my contextual level. And that kind of thing. No, I haven't done that type of an exercise to go through it. It's more like you've done, where it's like I got some ideas and I want to make sure I understand these things, and then I apply them, right? So.
And you showed ISO 27000, and then you also showed something open.
Oh, the Open Enterprise Security Architecture is from the Open Group. So if you're if you understand the TOGAF architecture, business, you know, the infrastructure or systems architecture, that would be their security piece that they have. And it's still available, but I think now they've more integrated the SABSA approach into TOGAF. So at least that's my understanding of it. So.
I hate to be the bad guy. It is now time.
All right.
David, thank you so much, Barry. We do have a certificate to give for him. Please plan to attend.